We cannot have an MMFM without our good friends from the UK. So that is just already been decided. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Dale. Thanks, Dale. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be, as I said yesterday, it's lovely to be here, back in Miami, back at the market, back with our great friends. And what I'm going to do very quickly before we get into the panel discussion is give you a kind of snapshot of sort of, I guess, where we were before the strikes and where I hope we'll be again once that's hopefully had a positive and sensible resolution sooner rather than later. And what I'm basically going to do is show you what's happened, because as a result of, I guess, as a result of government support, as a result of our industry coming together in the UK in a way that is pretty unique, I think we came together as an industry and realised that we had to make a case. We had to make a case, and we had to speak with one voice. We had to all work together. We had to develop our international partnerships. We had to develop our skills. We had to develop our infrastructure. And make government realise the economic significance of our industry. And that took a long time. But that time, combined with the expanse of an increase in demand from the studios, from the streamers, and the investment that the UK put into it, has led to a kind of unprecedented boom in production, in employment, in the growth of companies, in the growth of infrastructure in the UK, to make us far, far larger in terms of the content that we produce than the size of the UK itself as a country. And we've developed a very big market share of UK film and television. And again, we've only done that as a country punching, much larger than its total economic weight by partnership, by international partnership. And that's one of the reasons we're here, is because of our partnership with our great friends at the market. And I think I can advance just by
Speaks bar, yeah.
Yeah, by space bar. Yeah, you've had our modest little show reel indicating some of the small films and television programs that get made in the UK. And obviously this is the landscape. We're not completely stopped or suspended. In fact, the UK is lucky, like the rest of Europe in that sense, is that we have a very large domestic television market, and we also make a lot of terrific independent films. So not all of our industry is frozen and suspended. There is work going on throughout the UK nations and regions, but it is very badly affected by the strike. A lot of work is currently suspended. There's a huge amount of film and television that we're waiting to get rolling again. But we do believe that the strike isn't falling off a cliff. It's not going to change the kind of landscape forever in terms of demand, because all of you not only want to make things, but everyone still wants to watch things. There's no, as the success of Barbie and Oppenheimer proved, if there's great content out there, people will flood to see it. And we believe very much that the underlying strengths of our industry is the fact that people want content. They're not bored with watching movies or high-end television or unscripted drama or documentaries. They want it, and they want more of it. And so we feel that the growth will return, and that the underlying strengths of the industry and the underlying strengths of our industry in the UK are very much there, and we will resume as long as we keep on being competitive, we keep on being proactive, and we do we build on the things that we've been doing over the last few years. Obviously, that's kind of what's caused it all. We had the most extraordinary content spend in the UK. If I say, I think it's here somewhere, that's the levelling off. The levelling off is largely to do with the industrial suspension. There's been some contraction of content, but the long-term prognosis is still very, very healthy. That's just about the number of feature films produced in the UK, and the largest proportion of those, the most expensive proportion of those, are some of the ones you saw in that show reel. But the thing that's really driven the growth in the UK has actually not been feature film, notwithstanding the Star Wars franchise, notwithstanding the Fantastic Beasts films being made. It's actually the fact that House of Dragon, Lord of the Rings, Outlander, The Crown, etc., I could go on, are all being made in the UK. And those long-term shows, driving long-term employment, anchoring infrastructure and creating a demand for more infrastructure, has what's led to the growth. Rather obvious what's caused that: high volume of content commissioned, And tax relief. We've talked about tax relief. We're actually in the process of evolving our tax relief into what's called an expenditure credit, which we can talk to you about separately. But essentially, the government has future-proofed us by giving us a financial incentive which is transparent, reliable, has no cap, has no sunset time, isn't being reviewed by government, is very easy to use, and is there for the long term. And on top of that, we've invested in R&D. Companies have invested in R&D, so we've got lots of technological development going on, and we've invested in infrastructure. But most of all, we've invested in people. We've probably got one of the largest training programs on planet Earth for cast and crew, and we realised we weren't doing enough. So we actually, right now, I'm a member of a National Skills Task Force, and I'll talk about it a bit, that is actually investing more and more in skills. And we've got more and more work, not just going on in London and the South East. London is the creative hub. Helena will talk about that. Is the biggest centre, is the biggest concentration of our infrastructure, concentration of our crews and talent. But actually, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and the Midlands, and Yorkshire, and the North East are all now coming to this party, and television shows, crew are being based there, and it's all growing organically. Those are the figures, and they're quite staggering. That billions and billions and billions of pounds. 2022 was the biggest year in history for film production in the UK, film and television production in the UK. And our job is to make that happen, to make it see that happen, and to work on it, to troubleshoot it. That's why we worked on 93% of all of that work, which is why it's in our show reel, because we have that symbiotic relationship with the companies that are making it. And when the strike is resolved, all of the economic projections that we know are showing that growth is going to carry on. And we are estimating that it may be a bit later now, it may not be 25, maybe 26, but it's looking like it's going to go up to 6, 7, 7.5 billion over the next 2 or 3 years, which is huge. We have, I mentioned the tax credits, we have the tax credits. They are in the process, currently being revised. We'll have a new system introduced in January, which the government's future-proofed. It's actually also increased the rate of support for animation, so that actually if you want to work with us on animation, you are going to get a better deal starting in January. And they've preserved the competitiveness of it. Film London's role, I'll let Helena talk more about Film London's role, but obviously because of the capital, because we are in the capital, because that it does represent something like 80% of the total kind of content commissioning in the UK, it means there's a real heavy pressure on London to deliver content. It's the centre of our visual effects industries. The studios are in London. It's where the largest crew base, and it's where all the actors are, all the accountants, all the financiers are. So that's why London's so important, and that's why there's a dedicated entity, Film London, that actually has to service all of that and work with all of that. British Film Commission, well, I mentioned it. I mean, we look in two directions simultaneously. My job is to spend an awful lot of time talking to government, to explain to government why the film industry is good economically, why it's good for creating jobs, why it's good for careers, why it's good for young people to come into it, to make our workforce more diverse and more inclusive. And also, I spend an awful long time telling government what industry needs and relaying what industry needs, so that we remain a territory which has got distinct film-friendly policies. So the British Film Commission looks in two directions simultaneously, and on top of that, it also has to work with all the nations of the regions and Film London to ensure that when those huge juggernauts you saw in those showreels come into town, the wheels are oiled, and that the troubleshooting that's necessary, the British Film, they come to the British Film Commission with a problem, and I ring Helena and she has to sort it out. Or we ring somebody in Scotland to sort it out in Scotland, or Wales and Ireland. So we're like the hub with the spokes to delegate that granular on the ground stuff, but the British Film Commission is there to collect and to make sure that it does get sorted out by the people on the ground who know what they're doing. I mentioned international partnership as we started. This has become a really, Spain is a good example, there's an example here. But over the last year, particularly in the light of our change in relation to Europe and the European Film Commission, we have been cementing and re-energising our international partnerships. We've signed partnerships agreements with Spain and Italy. We're working much more closely with France. We signed partnership agreements with the Netherlands, with Austria, with Malta. We are working on a whole raft of creative partnership agreements, and there's some examples of me in cheesy photographs shaking hands with lots and lots of my European partners. But these are more than just words. This has actually created a much closer atmosphere between ourselves and our partners in Europe, a much more relaxed and creative set of partnerships. And I'm very proud that we're doing that, because, as I often say when Helena and I are in a room with European audiences, we might not be in the European Commission, but we still very much regard ourselves as being Europeans. And this is the proof of the pudding for us to demonstrate that. With all this demand, there was a real crying need for more skills, more people to come in our industry, and actually we didn't have enough studios. So the government gave us some money just before the pandemic, and we invested that money in talking to investors all over the world to say, why don't you build more infrastructure in the UK? Because we need it for the amount of content that's coming in. And that's just a very quick map that shows just what has been happening. There has been a colossal amount of new building. The streamers haven't just come in with content, the studios haven't just come in with content, they've come in to own or long-term lease bricks and mortar. And we have a huge amount of new infrastructure that's been coming on stream over the last 3 years, in and around London, but also in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland. In fact, I did a kind of trip around the nations and the regions over the last few months, and spent most of my time looking at new stages being built in these different areas. And it's very, very exciting. There's something like 4 million square feet of new space being built in the UK for the studios, which combined to what we've got probably equates to about 8 million square feet, which is probably more than the rest of Europe combined in terms of actual large-scale stage space. It's absolutely huge in a country of our size. And very exciting because, say, until the strike, most of it was occupied. And actually, most of it's occupied now, waiting to restart again. The other thing that's really important, we could talk about more, and it was fantastic hearing from JL and colleagues yesterday about their animation skills initiative, because for us, skills is absolutely critical, not just domestically, but internationally. We recognised that with the volume of demand, with all that work coming in, with all that money being spent, we didn't have enough people. We estimated that we need at least 20,000 plus new people to come into our industry, and it's probably a much higher proportion than that. So, as I said, what happened was we talked to the industry and everybody from the British Film, from the British Film Commission, but with our Producers Association, with Amazon, with Netflix, with Universal, with Paramount, Sony, everybody has come together. We've created a national skills task force. It's producing a report in October. The British Film Institute also gave a new sum of money to create new skills clusters, 7 of them, and Film London is running the London Metro skills cluster to train a whole new generation of young people into our industry in the most diverse and inclusive way that we possibly can. So this is mega for us. We're not only building millions of square feet of stages, but we're training people to come and be employed on those stages. And I think this is the largest training initiative in skills for the film industry and production anywhere in the world. And certainly when talking to my European counterparts, talking to other territories, I think we're doing more at a speed because we recognise we couldn't be complacent about it. And this initiative is still going on whilst the strike's going on. There's still enormous amounts of training, which we're just about to launch a whole raft of new training programmes all over the UK. And that's just, a sort of written version of what I just said. Lots going on, regional skills clusters, all happening. Is that... Have I got to the end? No. Animation, I'll let Helena talk about animation. We talked about it a bit yesterday. It's a big, important part of what Film London does. We're the only agency in the UK that actually has essentially an animation consultancy to support animation, and we are increasing the tax credit in animation. It's incredibly important to us, which is why we celebrate the initiative that's happening with Magic and the market. It's a fantastic initiative. So my kind of message leading into the kind of actual discussion is that despite the ups and downs, despite maybe some content shrinkage, despite the strikes, we believe the underlying strengths of our industry are very, very, very clear, and we believe we will return to growth. And what I'm doing is trying to make that as secure and stable as possible so that we can provide jobs and long-term fantastic employment for a whole new generation of people, and we can build our industry and work in partnership internationally so we can all share in that wealth. We can all share in that generation changing opportunities for people. British Film Commission is about film and television and a little bit about animation. It doesn't do games. That Film London does screen heritage, does cinema, does exporting British film, does a whole range of other things that the British Film Commission's remit is much narrower, and that's why that show reel is as diverse as it is.
Excellent. So let's bring this up and let's have a chat. So I would first like to turn it over to Film London's head of inward investment, Mackenzie. So let's dig in a little bit about some of these great programs that Adrian alluded to in his presentation. Talked a little bit about the Screamings, that sounds like a Halloween event. Just give you guys an idea, run with it. The Film London production finance market, and of course Upstream. I'll let you choose which one you want to talk about first.
I'm not going to talk about any of those first, actually. I'm going to talk about something else first.
Or that.
I'm going off piste already.
Yeah.
No, just to, so my role at Film London I wear two hats. They're very big hats. And the inward investment is one side of it, and the business development is the other side. And they do sort of perform two very different functions. So the inward investment stuff is about production attraction and is about getting people to come, whatever you're making, whether it's a game or an animation or a film or a TV, whatever, we want you to come and make it in London. So that's sort of one half of my job, and I have a team of excellent colleagues who can assist you if you're going to shoot a film in London, because you can't just come over and start shooting. You just it's a metropolitan capital city, and there's lots of things you can and can't do. You need to be able to navigate yourself around London, so we can help you do that. So if there's anyone in the room ever wanting to come and shoot in London, then please do come and see us, and we've got all the people that can help you do that. So, and that's, with locations, all of that kind of stuff, and give you advice on where you could shoot and how to shoot. Also, we have recently, in the recent years, started quite a big sustainability program too. So we are very committed to being as green as possible with our filmmaking. So there are certain things that we would be wanting you to get involved with in terms of green. But we have actually just in June this year launched probably something that was a very it's a great project, but it was very bureaucratic and took a long time. But at the end of the day, we've launched a new renewable energy grid, so that in a big location, a unit-based location in London, in a park, that is used a lot by the industry, and so they can now plug into the grid and use renewable energy, and which is going to not only save the production some money, but one would hope is going towards saving some of the planet as well. So we're very proud of that, and not only is that for film and TV, but because it's a static grid, it can be. This is a very big park that it's located in, so it can be used for music events and everything as well. So it's a really terrific initiative that we've been doing. And just to touch on the animation thing, when we were here last year, we brought an animation delegation with us. We are very proud of our animation work in the UK, but again, we do so much work with international partnerships and collaboration that we want our people to meet you guys, and so we had a very successful trip here last year with them, and also Patty and the team came over to London in October with your Commissioner Regalado, who is a champion of a lot of the neurodiversity work that we're doing within animation too, as part of our animation disability scheme, which we started actually in the lockdown. One of the things that the lockdown did allow people to do, I think, was you had to stop. There was no question about it. Everyone stopped, and it gave us time to think about other things, and so we put together a new animation disability. When I was sort of thinking that basically, when everything pivoted in terms of people working from home, and animation would never allow that to happen because of security. And they had to get their security sorted out so that they could carry on working. And then that meant, it sort of dawned on us that basically that meant that people who would have accessibility problems could now perhaps work in animation because they don't have to get on a train to go to work or whatever, this kind of stuff. So that's really something that we're proud of and that we're still working on, and particularly within the neurodiversity area. So those are things that we're very proud of on the inward investment side. But one of the reasons that we're here and is on the business development side. The business development side is about putting people with people. It's putting people together and making things happen. The London Screenings, the London Screenings is actually a British film export event. It's the only one of its kind in the UK, and that happens every year in June. And we take all the new independent British films that have been made in the last year, and we bring over a bunch of distributors from around the world, put them up in a hotel for a few nights, and they can watch all these independent films and don't let them leave unless they bought one of them for their territory.
That's the screening, right?
yeah.
They might scream, but they don't get out.
So that's very successful, and next year we will be doing our 20th edition of that programme, so that's good. The production finance market is not a co-production market. It is a finance market. It is happening in 3 weeks' time in London, umbrellaed within the London Film Festival, and that is a series of it's speed dating for people with money and for people that want money to finance their film. So we will have it is only film. It's not for television, but so we have producers coming again from around the world. As well as our own producers meeting with financiers of all different types of financiers, and they have their 20-minute meetings in the hope that they will have, perhaps by the end of the market, they would have maybe increased their budget by, not increase the budget, but increase the money that they're getting for their budget by maybe another 20% or something. They've certainly progressed that project forward. So that's in a few weeks' time. And then there's our baby, our newest programme that we do is called Upstream, and actually that's one of the reasons that we're having our one-to-one meetings here. Upstream is an IP market, and so we're looking at stuff, really, really early days stuff, and with that we feel could have the legs to go into, to be developed into either film or TV or games. We do it online, and we have done it online out of necessity at first because of the lockdowns and everything, but actually it works pretty well online. And it's a series of fireside chats. So basically, if your project is selected, then either myself or Adrian or my various colleagues, will talk you through, we'll talk with you, and you will talk about your project. And whilst you're talking about perhaps the creative content side of things, which is great, we're also going to be pulling out from you some of the business part of it, the business side of things that our executives want to hear, because basically those people that are tuning in to Upstream are development executives and producers from TV production companies, from film production companies, and from the gaming world. And the successes that we've had, this is only 4 years old, we've only been doing it for that many years, so and we've had successes every year that have come from it. Now, what eventually happens We don't know yet, but in terms of projects being picked up, we've had that. So we will have things like podcasts, we'll have true stories that are maybe from sort of local papers around the country. We'll have illustrations that might be, could either be developed into an animation or not. We've had all internet published books. Those tend to go. They tend to be quite interesting because if they've already got a readership, so they've got an audience, so that they're built in already. So that comes with, one would hope, if you've read the internet book, you would go and see the film when it comes out, when it's made, or the TV show, or whatever. So we've just our success from last year was actually an illustration story about a young girl who lives in a forest, and the forest is going to be redeveloped for housing or whatever by these big developers, and she fights against the corporations, and it's all about corporate greed actually is the underlying message that's coming through, and she's trying to save the forest, and she communicates with the forest and the mushrooms and the fungi and this kind of stuff, and the trees have a council of trees and they all talk to each other, and it's a super special project. And I had in my mind that would be taken for like a dark fairy tale kind of thing, like I was thinking of Maleficent or something like that, But actually a games company bought it and have acquired it. They've been developing it. It's now in pre-production, and they're making a trilogy.
Oh, wow.
So so it's and this is somebody who in her spare time does all these illustrations, and she makes greetings cards and earrings and works in a supermarket.
Wow.
So she actually said to me, it's kind of like the question that you think you want to be asked is actually the most frightening question, when the games company said to her, how much do you want for this?
Right.
And she said, what do I say, Helena?
But you told them.
A lot.
So we actually ended up. It got very intricate. We actually in the end we actually got her an agent, and who just coincidentally happened to live like 2 miles down the road from her in London. And it was just like, right, you two have got to go out and grab coffee because you can do the deal. So the agent gets a new client, and a client with a deal on the table,
hand,
basically. Yeah. So
The one the agents really like.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing we do.
Wow, that's impressive. All right, the deal maker, Stewart Mackinnon, train conductor, deal maker, and just a man of mystery. So
It's all true.
I'm creating the legend of Stewart Mackinnon at MMFM. That's what I'm doing. And I know that we wanted to make this a little more conversational and get some questions from the audience, but if you could just tell us in a little snippet of, as a creative producer, what are you looking for in terms of this exciting a new story, or a filmmaker or an artist or an idea?
Well, I think that all the producer does is spend their life
Spend
spend their lives looking for money. And I always tell people that you either have to be born rich or marry someone who's rich, or you can't be a producer. On one hand, there are people in the industry who are really skilled and talented at making whatever is in front of them. And the best example of this is I won't mention his name, but there's a line producer I worked with probably 25 years ago. And I remember finishing the film and thinking, if there's ever a war, I'm phoning this man up. He had the ability to unflappable to deal with every kind of problem. Production where you have 2 or 3 weeks this was a TV film, and we had 2 or 3, maybe 5 weeks to make it. And he was just the most impressive problem solver. And you meet these very strange people who have this ability that, it could be bullets and flying and bombs dropped, and they make these films. But the thing that puzzles me is that the only reason I'm in this industry and sort of dealing with all the problems that you spend your lifetime learning to deal with is telling stories. And and bringing to telling stories your own life experience. So you're kind of I was talking to a couple of people this morning about this. One of the very great, for me, writers of Britain, a man called Jimmy McGovern, and there was a soap on, this is probably 30 or 40 years ago, soap on Channel 4, and I got a call from a friend who said, you've got to start watching this soap. There's a writer, a guy called Jimmy McGovern, who's writing these incredible dramas. So it's a soap, people mock soaps. I think they're extraordinarily talented people that work on them and really skillful. They're reflecting life on a day-to-day basis, and they're undervalued. And in many ways, they are the kind of the place in which great writing training is kind of developed, the skilled people develop. I mean, I just think some of the greatest writers in Britain, some of the shows that are written here, you will find that these people spent 3 years working on soaps. But Jimmy was involved in a training scheme for a group of young writers. It was a competition I'd set up with BBC Two for writers new to television. So we put out this ad in BBC Two, and not knowing how many responses we got 3,200 scripts, and a team of 12 readers boiled this down to 7, and then Jimmy and I worked with 7 writers on this over a weekend, and he posed this problem. He said, I have a scene in a film I've written, and the scene in the film was, the story was about a drug taking and a couple who had a child, and they'd fallen out, and the relationship had fallen apart because he wouldn't stop taking drugs. And he said, how would I get this couple back together again? And so we all went off into dark rooms to write this scene. And then he showed us the sequence. And what happened in the sequence which he'd written was that the couple were, the wife was, or the partner was pushing the pram. He was walking alongside her, appealing to stop. And he walked straight into a platform, smashed his nose, and she immediately picked him up. So with no dialogue in this scene, he made this incredibly moving, emotional sequence. So here was this skilled guy, who none of you will, I'll be surprised if any of you knew Jimmy, but he only writes in and about his life and the town in which he lives in the northwest. And I've talked to him about writing for me and writing in other stories, but he's someone that he'll say, this is the world I know, these are the people I know, and he has this, it gives an authenticity. So that's my core of the film business, looking for material which allows me selfishly to think, how do I get this onto screen? And the skill that I know I've developed is of the screenwriting process, of how you put this down on a page. But my principal job, day-to-day job, is to finance these shows. And one of the things that in discussions with people I've had here and at other events like this, you have this kind of discussion, you talk about this project or that project, but what I've found is that the majority of people who come to events like this, and I may be wrong about you, so you all, but it's how you get your idea onto the screen, to take the idea from the thing you love, you've developed, it may be about your life, it may be about a book you've written, it may be about something you've come across, how you get onto screen. And I thought I would quickly, I don't know if this is helpful, quickly run through a number of things that I've been involved in and how this sort of convoluted route the inventor and producer has to take to get these onto screen. I mentioned yesterday this series I did for Amazon, which started at BBC, which I mentioned this figure yesterday. It was one season cost just about $100 million. It was just under $100 million. The next 3 were over $100 million for each season. There were 4 seasons. This is one season that you can get if you pay 70 quid on Amazon, you can watch. I just think it's extraordinary. But the other side of that is a film I made with a group of Norwegian nations, small nations in the world, have been squeezed out of the market. Many of these programs that were available to a nation like Finland or Norway, Sweden, they simply don't have the capital to fully finance their own movies. And over the past 30 or 40 years, what they've done is they came together and they will make one tentpole series per season. And the rest of the material they're showing are bought from the French, the Germans, America. That market's gone. The platforms and various outlets have been buying up all these programs. So in the smaller nations of the world, your real challenge as to how you fund shows which reflect your own culture. So I was asked if I would get involved in a story of people I'm sure are aware of it. Germany invaded Norway. There was a race to, as people I'm sure have seen this masterful work, Oppenheimer, a race to develop a nuclear bomb. What wasn't told in that story was that it actually is mentioned in the Oppenheimer story. There was a race in Germany to develop the nuclear bomb. They were just weeks behind in creating this bomb. They needed a particular chemical, which was a byproduct of an agricultural chemical that was used to spray on fields, called heavy water. Germans invaded Norway to capture the one factory that made this stuff. And that's what the story was about. So the kind of Nordic countries wanted that story to be told. So I was asked to pull together a team of writers, and the financing for that, this is what I wanted to share with you, was that 7 nations putting a bit money into development costs, plus one of the, I won't mention the name, but it's the big distributor that's based in Nordic countries, one of the Nordic countries. So we had a bit of money to do it, and then my job was to pull the script together. We made 6 episodes, and I raised some money from Germany. It was pre-sold you pre-sell some cash, some private capital was put into this series, and we made it. And it's won the Prix Italia. It was a really nicely made film. But the difficulty, as an aside, is that we went into production too soon, because the money was there only for a certain period. And so if we didn't get into production, the money was lost. So that was the kind of crazy business that that particular project faced me with. I could go on.
Do you want to do the other one?
Yeah, well, I could. I was going to go through 6, but it's going to take long.
No. I think you should do 3.
Yeah.
We'll do a podcast. How's that, Stewart?
But it's. I mean, maybe be interested. It's this. It's. If
Suppose
you're
they should too.
Yeah, if you're a studio, if you go to a studio like Amazon, as I mentioned yesterday, it's fully financed. So the problem of finance is just swept away. You have a sort of not unlimited source of money. If you're making something outside the studio model, which many of the people here want to play in, want to make or move into the studio, learn their skills before you get to make your studio film, this is the route you have to take, and it's becoming more and more complicated and difficult. Tax credits are part of that, and why we 3 are here, we all play very different roles in the industry, is to look for new partnerships which will bridge the Spanish-speaking world and the English-speaking world, because the producers and writers, directors and novelists and people in the industry in the world where Spanish is spoken all want to get into English-speaking, and the English-speaking world want to reach the audiences that are Spanish-speaking world. So we see Spain, Miami, and the UK as a kind of potential partnership, occupy a space and take this, sort of embrace that opportunity, which is a technological change. Another film, a movie made with, it was a play that landed on my desk by a very famous writer in Britain. And that was a phone call to the BBC Films who said, "You've got Ronnie Harwood to write this screenplay, we'll fund it." And the film was funded very quickly from private capital, BBC Films. And, the film was cast, it was, fantastic with a classic British cast, made for a relatively small sum of money. An unknown figure in the distribution world called Harvey Weinstein took it and did a really great job in selling it. I mean, I'll stop there, but every film that you make, every drama series that you make is an entirely new financially structure. And going back to this bridging, working with people in Miami, what we're looking for are stories that will have will say something about our world, that's me speaking, something meaningful about the world, but financially makes sense to reach into these different markets. So it's trying to think of what would work across. A story about a town where I live in the north of England will not resonate with people here, where it's always raining where I live and always sunny. But it's finding that content. So one of the additional things that the independent writer, producer, director has to find is a story that bridges these two cultures.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, this is a good place to do it. So with that said, let's bridge over to our audience and see if we have a couple questions. Over here.
Stewart, do you, so you're saying that people in England would not resonate with, people in Miami would not resonate with a story like where you're from in England, right? You think people in England would resonate with Miami stories?
Well, it's finding a story that you think that has in the DNA of the story some universal appeal. And we all know these films. You'll get a film will emerge, it will wins international awards. It just captures the world. It may be set in Afghanistan or a village in the north of England, or a community here in Miami. But there's something in the story that speaks to the world, and that's what the industry wants, and that's what people here can do, and what we can all do as writers and producers.
Yeah, good question. All right, I'm in the front.
I have a general question. So it used to be all filmmakers said, I want to get my film into Sundance.
Yeah.
Then it became, I want to get my film onto net.
Yeah.
Now it's, I want to make a series.
Yeah.
And I always make a speech to filmmakers who are sort of emerging that a series is not the way to start. I make a feature. But I just wonder if any of you have an alternate version to that, to my speech that I always make.
I just want to chip in on this. It's an interesting question. I mean, because I think neither of those positions is really true. Because I was thinking of Sundance, and Sundance had a bumper crop of some fantastic films like Polite Society and Rye Lane, British films. They all pretty much all ended up with streaming deals. Actually, Polite Society, for example, was written and directed by a woman who'd made a comedy television series first. And she wrote this brilliant about an Asian rock band, which scared the broadcaster scared them to death, even though it was incredibly funny, because it was about a group of Muslim young women, and they thought the BBC was going to get blown up. Channel 4 was going to get blown up for it. In fact, it won all these awards, and ironically, because she was so successful making that film, somebody said, "What do you want to make next?" And she said, "I want to make my independent film." My independent feature film. So she then made her independent feature film on the back of the television series, which went to Sundance, and then got bought and Universal. I'm trying to remember. It got a big distributor to buy it. Versus a first-time feature called Rye Lane, which was done. It was working.
Yeah.
I was right. Polite Society was working.
Working title.
They went through working title. The independent producer is a friend of ours. Went through working title. Working title then did the deal with Focus. Came out. Came out through Universal. Versus Rye Lane. Rye Lane essentially got a deal with Netflix and came out that way. I think it really does depend. I mean, still, I think, see what you might have viewed this. I still think that most people think that if you're going to try and make a mark, then ideally making your feature film debut, particularly if you're a writer direct your feature film debut, and getting it in somewhere like Sundance, is going to be better if you get that profile of the festival than it just going onto the platforms. Because the problem with the platforms, as we all know, with independent films is unless you're already trailing some kind of critical or commercial success through festival presence or some kind of theatrical, it'll get dropped on the platform and nobody will know it's there. That's the problem with independent feature films and streaming, is that it's great because as you can get all the money. Pretty much, the 90% of the money, the streamers will use the tax credits as well. You'll get 90% of the money to make the feature film. You won't have to worry about doing all the things that Stewart spends his life doing, piecing it together from 5 different sources. You'll get the tax credit. The rest of it will be provided by the streamer. You won't own it. They will own it. You'll get no rights in it. They will own it.
You won't see another penny afterwards.
But you won't see any more money after that. But you'll get to make it, and you won't spend 5 years trying to make it, and you can move on with a healthy dearth of cash flow to make the next thing. But you don't know whether anybody's actually going to watch it at all. On Netflix or Amazon. I mean, it's a fact. You don't. Whereas a television series, they'll invest so much money in marketing it, the television series, that their subscribers are at least going to give it a chance, some kind of chance. Whereas you just don't know that with independent films. So I still think that route, however hard it is for an independent film to get into festivals, to get into some kind of theatrical context before it goes on a platform, is still the best route. But it's also insanely difficult, isn't it, Stuart?
Yeah, it really is.
But can I just add to what another route for me is that this is for me is the biggest problem if you're starting in the industry, how you make this. You've got the ideas, and old guy like me, we'll come here and you'll meet different people. These are really great ideas, but the journey made from there to there is just years and years of work. And the problem is that on that journey, the broadcaster understandably doesn't want to trust a writer on a long-running series they've never done it before, because it's warfare in a room. You've got to be so tough. That's crap. Someone will say your idea, and you have to take that. Whereas if you're a British writer sitting in the Cotswolds writing, going for a coffee and getting having a nice time, you're not challenged. You're not being threatened. So, there are, I think, lots and lots of ways of achieving it. For me, one of the journeys that I think people should consider is local theatre are often much more accessible to writers to work in a. I mean, where I come, in the north of England, there are 2 theatre companies that have sessions with new writers. That's one thing. Another is, and then you meet the writers who are writing professionally. Mentoring, I think, is something really to be encouraged. If you're working with a writer who's generous and will help you with a play, or you can see that the stages they go through, on a screenplay, I won't name names, but the very prominent writer who I've worked with on a project a few years ago, she said she was the first writer on the screenplay, and she was the 7th writer that did the last draft. And it was colour-coded. Now, there were probably up to these 7 writers. Each writer would probably have 3 drafts. This is an incredible amount of work just to get this into good shape. So there are other ways of doing it, but I think the journey to train the soap, anyone that can get onto a soap or be a trainee on a soap, you will see this process. Brilliant. Looking ahead of the storylining. And another would be radio. Radio's in Britain. It really, I listen to radio plays looking for new talent in writing. It's a kind of teaching ground. You got a bit of editorial input, and the final go on, but is script reading is if you can, you get paid really terrible money to learn as a script reader to do a quick synopsis, what it's about, what's wrong with it, what works, and where's the market for that. Right. And if you've done that, many of the writers I've worked went through 2 or 3 years of that. They know how to structure a story. They know the market because they know that from their employer. They're not going to do that kind of drama. They're not going to make War and Peace if a writer who's just left film school. So these are a few ideas. There were other things. Mentoring for me is crucial. Industry needs to work with people with experience on every aspect of production. And the training scheme in Britain has been doing that. I think it's a fantastic scheme. It's you make contacts, you build bridges with people who you can phone and take advice from.
And the other thing I was going to add, Helena might want to come in. The other thing I was going to add is that, the thing, the difficult thing to say is when you're thinking about projects such as you really do need to think about what you ideally want to be, because the truth is very few people are really writer-directors. Very, very, very few. Most people are either one or the other. Most directors contribute to a screenplay, will input and make comments on the screenplay, but they're not writers. Most writers are not directors. And if you look at our industry, it doesn't matter what country, 90% of the directors aren't writers. They are working with writers. And actually writers are working with producers, because it's producers working with their agents, etc., who are the people that get them to be commissioned to write. And understanding that dynamic is really, really important, because the problem is, and it's an educational issue, it's not understanding how the industry really works. There are a small group of people, I've mentioned two of them, made 2 great British films this year, so it does happen, but it's actually 0.0.1% that actually are writer-directors. Most people are one or the other. Most great directors don't write screenplays. Let's just talk about Martin Scorsese. As far as I know, never written a film. Still hasn't stopped him being one of the greatest directors that's ever lived. And people talk about Scorsese films. They don't necessarily talk about the fact that they were written by Paul Schrader, or they were written by, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important to understand that dynamic and think about that, because again, kind of really good. It's like the brilliant chap who. Joe Mendes,
Joe, yeah.
Joe, going from directing lots and lots and lots and lots of TV, and now he's got a big movie that he's working on with a major studio feature film. The guy who directed brilliantly the British television series Slow Horses for Apple Television, did the first 2 seasons, left the show so that he could make his feature film debut after doing brilliant, high-end, multi-million-pound television, to go and make a low-budget feature film, because he wants to do that as a director. But that's you're understanding that dynamic is really important, and writers shouldn't be necessarily pitching for money themselves. They should be pitching to work with someone like him.
Right. That's a good point. Thanks. Yeah.
Gail, there is actually one lady who's had her hand up.
I was really interested in what you said about Upstream. I don't have the meeting books. I have a novel that I've written. I've got 2 more screenplays in the works. I've got a mini-series about the resistance in France. I'd love to talk to you about how I can...
Well, grab me.
There you go. Yes, and you can see our friends and our colleagues that are staff outside that'll help you as well, because they do have some meetings coming up. There might be time to put another one together. So, Helena, any final words?
I would just say to everyone that's in this room is to keep coming to these kind of events. Networking is really key, and getting to meet people, and that's how you kind of get your face around the industry and stuff like that. So these things, if you don't get something by coming to an event like this, it's because you haven't worked hard enough. So you will always get something if you put your mind to it from an event like this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. So if you get a chance to meet with them before they go, it's worth the wait. So thank you to our amazing panelists, Adrian, Stewart, and Helena. And we'll take a quick break, and we're going to go right into our meetings. And I think that's our last. This was the Martini panel of the MMFM. So it will be happy hour soon enough. So thank you guys again. And let's go have some meetings.